Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.
With OWL, the Overwatch League, and LCS, particularly obviously at the moment the NaLCS, we have two big franchised leagues. We have leagues which the premise is people are buying in with big investment figures, some bigger than others, and you have all these outside sources of investment, such as obviously traditional sports teams in North America, big VeXii companies, coming in, trying to establish this league so that in the future it can become something comparable to or akin to the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, etc. English Premier League, whatever it might be. I mean, that's not technically a franchise league, but they're trying to be at that kind of a level. Now, one of the issues here is to justify those buy-ins and to justify the long-term investment in infrastructure that people are supposed to be putting in and putting down roots in terms of geolocation and really building towards a bigger league and a bigger future for esports in this particular model. The only way to justify it long-term is to be able to show people an ROI, a return on investment, to show people revenue figures that are coming in, that are growing, bigger deals that are going out there, increasing the media exposure, the penetration of esports into mainstream consciousness in Western culture. But quite frankly, overall, based on things I've heard from team owners privately off the record, based on situations I've been able to observe with how these things have been reported on and the official comment in press releases about sponsorships, revenue numbers, etc., there aren't a good enough amount of sponsorships being sold. The actual level of sponsorship in the context of each specific league isn't quite where you'd expect it to be. And the concerns are whether it can be in the coming years. It's all well and good to say, well, we're just here now, but in year two we'll be like, 1.25 times that, and then 1.25. And look, and if you look at the trajectory by year 5, year 10, it's like, will there be a year 5, year 10? That's a big question, a big if right now. And certainly in terms of whether these investors will be here, or whether they'll just cut their losses and say, I won't throw good money after bad, I'm going to get out now. And either you have to, at that point, if it's not legit and the numbers out there, con someone else into getting involved, maybe raise the buy-in amount, get some other guy, make more money that way, so you can put it into the league and then say, oh, look, we've got numbers coming in here, guys, don't worry about this. Or you're going to be a scenario where you're not going to get that growth and you're not going to get exponential growth. You're not going to have a chart that goes up like this that, yeah, an investor would love to see. But if he's told that about a stock or some other type of a company, he's at least going to be skeptical, right? And he's really going to have to see something that's like proof of concept, like reasoning that's very, very sound. Now, first and foremost, I will make a distinction between the two, the Overwatch League and the NaLCS, because the Overwatch League, based on the things I've been told, does have like the highest sponsor deals that any kind of league like this has ever had, and perhaps any league in esports history has had, in terms of the big sponsors, the big amount of money that they're able to bring in. But to be fair, you can't view that in isolation. You can't just take the number as an absolute number and compare it and say, right, well, it's doing very well. In fact, it's doing the best, which is what they've tried to imply sometimes and specifically talked about, like exceeding expectations, etc. Because the problem is the context of the Overwatch League is very different to any other league in esports history, and even compared to the LCS, the other big franchised league in Western esports, because the buy-in is much, much higher than even the LCS, and obviously there isn't a buy-in to certain other leagues. The investment that teams are making into infrastructure is much higher. Investment into teams themselves is much, much higher, and specifically because of this, people trying to get their foot in the door, get a piece of the pie now, before the pie gets bigger and before it becomes a massive thing, and then you look back and go, what, I could have bought it for 10 million, and now a team's worth 700 million. Well, in that side of a scenario, that's the way people are thinking. Then you imagine the lofty goals of it. It's not even just trying, in that case, be like the LCS and be like the best league it can be, but based in North America. They're trying to go with the geolocation aspects. You're also then going to, even if the league succeeds and goes years and makes good revenue, then you're going to again double down, and you're then going to put more investment in and gamble again that you can now make it work, not just in LA, not just online, not just as a global presence and the top-down aspect. You're going to go grassroots up and build up some kind of like a groundswell of fans and an arena in your location, and then sell tickets and try and do activations locally as well as on a nationwide level. Like, this is something where the numbers have to be really good, or they have to catch up very quickly, or they have to really take off at some point in time. Otherwise, 2 or 3 years isn't going to be enough for the Overwatch League. Like 5 years might not be enough to get to where they're talking about, and yet that's what you've sold people on. Then you add in the Overwatch League has downsides that the LCS doesn't. Like, you have to rebrand entirely. You're not Cloud9 if you come into the Overwatch League. You're not, well, in the case we'll go one of the only other ones that has two, right? You're not Optic Gaming that has the green one, like your Houston Outlaws backed by the Infinite people. So you have to start over. Sure, not entirely. Some of that crossover comes, but you're starting over with the name, with the brand that people know, how you sell it. Then, as I say, the geolocation angle is also another aspect of starting over, which they haven't even done yet at this point in time. I always say this, the Overwatch League hasn't even begun its central premise. This is all a prelude. So never mind saying that it's succeeded now, it is far from succeeding. There's been some early steps that were good, and some things behind the scenes from some owners that they don't like the way it is, and they don't think it's very good actually, and some of them regret buying in. Now, one aspect as well that I want to address is with the Overwatch League, we'll talk about the LCS in a second, there was also the whole angle of them selling the broadcast rights to Twitch. There was some fuckery in that deal because the number was way too high. From the top of my head, wasn't it like $90 million for a certain period of time? Now, I always said this when I heard about that. First of all, who was Twitch competing against there? Who was the number 2 streaming platform that was offering, say, $80 million or $75 million, and they had to come in and drive a hard deal or like cut negotiations short so they could get on with things and just say, right, well, we'll pay this amount and we want these things in exchange. Where was that person? Yeah, that's the dodgy thing, right? So why was it what seemed like quite a high number for a broadcast rights deal to have it on their platform? Well, that's the thing. First of all, the other reason why it seemed dodgy is it came right down to the wire, right? That should benefit Twitch. If anything, they were the ones who had the leverage and had the Overwatch League over a barrel. They could have drove it right down. That could have been 40 million. What if there's no other big competitor offering anywhere close to that? Twitch offers you 40 million on the last day. You're not taking that deal? You're just going to have no deal? You're just going to have a very small deal? You're going to put it on MLG TV, are you? I don't think so. I think that would have been a much, much worse position. I think the owners would not have been happy about that whatsoever. Now, things I heard within the industry is there were other elements of this deal that weren't about the dollar amount and the sheer aspect of I pay you X amount in exchange for Y broadcast rights. These were things around the league and other components that someone like Twitch will be able to benefit from, and therefore it offset the fact that it was so high. And then there was the industry element where perhaps Twitch wants the Overwatch League to succeed and then be something that's partnered with them and goes that way. So there was a little bit of fuckery about that, I have to say. It wasn't as legit as just saying like a company comes in that's unconnected, pays X amount and gets the broadcast rights. Now, as much as I can say that about the Overwatch League, where the fuck is the LCS's big deal that it's announced? Where's their big broadcast rights deal with Twitch, right? The LCS has brought a lot of views to Twitch over the years. This has been one of the best consistent leagues that the Twitch guys have been able to show. But that's why I say the Overwatch League is dodgy, because I know why there isn't one for the LCS and why they're not boasting of like a massive figure of like $200 million for the next 2 years of the LCS. Because again, who is competing against them? At this point in time, yes, it definitely benefits Twitch to have the LCS, especially because they get it fairly cheap, especially compared to the Overwatch League. But you know what? It also benefits the LCS to be on Twitch. Would the LCS be able to try and sell the sponsorships it's going to do now and have the same team investment that's going to do now? Would it get the same viewership on some other platform? No, probably not, right? Or it'd be vastly decreased and depleted in comparison. And so as a result, you see there the natural symbiosis that at the moment has to take place for both to succeed, and hence there isn't this big swapping of money. So that's why I say there's the other aspects going on with the Overwatch League one, which on the one hand, what fair played for getting the big deal, but on one hand, and then on the other hand, I actually see that it's not quite as crazy and great as it seems on the surface overall. And LCS hasn't actually been able to even match offering these extra things to the Twitch guys to get them to come on board and make a big announcement. Because you don't think LCS would love to come out and say $100 million for the next 2 or 3 years of Twitch having the broadcast rights to LCS? Of course it would. It looks silly that Overwatch League has it and the LCS doesn't. Now, I will say, if we address the LCS for a second, and we'll come back to some of the other aspects in a more general sense that'll address Overwatch as well. How is the LCS not doing a better job of selling sponsorships? I told you there that people are actually behind the scenes saying like numbers are very high in terms of the Overwatch League's actual dollar amounts and like some of the deals they brought in and the companies they brought in. The LCS should have been at the same level or better, and forget now when the Overwatch League's come out, before the Overwatch League even came out. This is a very long established league in North America. It's been going since 2013. It's been at a position where people have been investing hundreds of thousands, millions for like 3, 4, 5 years at this point in time. The teams have all grown. Viewership's been at a very consistent and fairly high level for esports, much better over the history than the Overwatch League was. How are they not able to get the big name deals? How are they not able to convert a much better history and viewership model than the Overwatch League, which at times struggled and has seen massive dips and is very much a gamble in that contrast. That's a question you have to ask yourself, right? Now, my answer would be, obviously some speculation and some inside information, is Riot doesn't have the people to land those deals. Or if they start talking with someone on a deal, they don't have the person to get maximum value out of a deal while still creating value for the person buying in. So you're not just fleecing them entirely. They also don't manage to get the deals over the line sometimes when they have them in place. We all saw what happened with the BAMTech deal. Now we see this sort of lackluster ESPN Plus deal that's come out of nowhere at the end that doesn't look half as good. Then you've got to consider, that's totally logical. As far as I know about the Overwatch League, one thing I actually was vaguely happy about was hearing about some of the different people, business people they had in place to try and make these deals. Now, they haven't done a good enough deal, in my opinion, in the context of how big their goals are, or at least what where they are now. If they think that's a success, they're going to have to really build on that heavily the next few years. Otherwise, beyond just some rumblings now, some people are going to really start to think, do I keep invested in this? Like, are the numbers really checking out here? Are they going to make a corner turn in season 3, season 4, it's going to make it worth it? But if you think that's bad, think about the Riot example, right? Who is the famous business person at Riot that knows how to land big deals? Who's the person in the esports industry? Now, these are rhetorical questions, by the way, but if I was asking industry people, they could give me the answers, and their answers would be, we don't know. I mean, who is it, right? Is there someone famous? There are plenty of people in the history of esports who've been very good at business stuff and selling people and pitching, etc. Now, I will say, most of those people work for the teams currently, and that's why the team's valuation has gone through the roof, and they've done a fantastic job marketing, getting big sponsors on board, investment without giving up all the equity, gotten their players at like reasonable salary prices, but then can still compete in their leagues. The really savvy business people are in the teams. Who was in the LCS and Riot and on some level Tencent's informing? Who's doing that for the LCS? I don't really know. And so that makes me think, when I hear about who is involved, that they don't have the competence. They don't have any established history that they'd be able to do it. In fact, it's logical to think that, right? This is a company that developed the game. They are the game developer. Now, they own the IP rights, so they're in a position to be the one who's in charge of their franchise league, the LCS, and then they decide if they're the ones who are going to sell it and they're the ones who are going to take the pitches, etc. But why would being good at being a game developer, which is even debatable how good they are in terms of League of Legends, but okay, in the world of how successful League of Legends is a game, okay, they've been somewhat successful, in some senses very successful as an esports game developer, right? Beyond that, and then designing the game and maintaining the game, where would those skill sets even cross over? Obviously, you wouldn't even be using those people to sell the sponsorship, so you've got different people in anyway, but where's the track record and where are the results at this point in time? If I have a basketball team, even if I have some mediocre players, if you lose all the time, I'm probably going to get fired if I'm the coach. Now, if I have a basketball team and I have a bunch of good players and I actually have a squad that seems like it's proven it can win and I can't win, I'm definitely going to get fired and I'm going to get blamed, even if maybe it wasn't entirely my fault, just because it's going to be considered, well, you should have been able to in that scenario. So that's the situation here with the LCS. Now, the previous position also has to be brought up, that Riot obviously for many years bragged and in a kind of smug way pointed out that they used to lose money in esports. Obviously because they were using it as a marketing adjunct to the main casual game where they made all their money through the skins and IP, RP, etc. And so that was obviously an obvious position, but they spun it as though they were just good guys for doing esports. They could have been selling these sponsorships from day one. They could have allowed teams to have like name brand deals where it's Cloud9 Coca-Cola, or it's the Curse Pepsi squad. They could have done all these things early on. Sometimes they were actually in the face of these deals and go, no, we don't want these things. That's the thing. They not only didn't embrace themselves selling the esports side, they just made it like this is a cool marketing tool for our game. They didn't see the vision actually of having a franchise league, etc. at that point in time. Hence the big thing with VeXii, love me some VeXii and Mark Merrill, etc. And that was the pushback from the owners. And then they cleverly, they can deny us all they want, yet leveraged the Overwatch League and the potential to go into the Overwatch League to get themselves the deal they wanted in the LCS initially, which quite frankly hasn't been as good a deal as they'd have hoped for. They had that. Well, that was cool when Riot did that, because my cynical read on it, to read that you'll hear from people like Monty as well, is they did that because they wanted to control every aspect. If you don't take big sponsorship elsewhere, if you don't make it a franchise league, if you don't do a rev share model, then when someone complains, oh, why do you run it that way? Oh, I wish you had this here. You can say, hey, it's my toy. I'll play with it anywhere I want. It's my ball. I'll go home with it anytime I please. I'm not here for you. You're not. I don't owe you anything. I'm going to control every aspect of this, and everyone's going to do what I say and dance to my merry jig. Well, or dance a merry jig to my tune, as the old idiom would go. Well, you can't do that anymore at this point in time. Now you're in the business world. Now you've got to succeed. Now you've got to show me some numbers. Now you've got to actually, in the context of what you've got as a product, sell that product and do a good job. Else you're the one fucking up. The product's good. Why are you not able to sell it? I mean, Kelby, one of the former management people at CLG, said he could easily sell the LCS and get big money. I totally believe him. That's one of the things. And that's another aspect that I have in this respect that I want to address, actually, which is, I think if you look at the people who have the competency and the history and expertise to sell something like the Overwatch League and the NALCS, they're already in those leagues. It's just they're the team owners. And so the frustrating thing for guys like that is people like Jack Etienne, people like Steve Arneset, people like, in the past, Hex from Optic. These guys, in their own fields, they know what they're doing. They're very savvy when it comes to cultivating a fan base and then branding themselves, and then figuring out how to leverage that branding into a great sponsorship, and then figuring out how to get the activations and engagement from those sponsorship deals and make it so that you get a long-term partner, or you get an even better deal next time, or you can raise the prices of what you're doing. And not only are you getting the money and succeeding, but the people you're doing the sponsorships with feel like they're succeeding as well, like it was a good deal for them and it's a good partnership for them. These people are the people I would want selling the Overwatch League. I would want selling the NALCS, and if it failed then, I'd even be happy to say maybe it can't succeed. Maybe this just isn't the right time for esports. Maybe it just couldn't be done. We gave it a great shot. But since those people aren't the ones involved, in some senses, they're just sat back on their hands because they are the people waiting to benefit from this. They're just having to watch people who are inexperienced, incompetent, sometimes actually have a philosophy that is very naive because it comes from the developer philosophy of like, be like happy you're even allowed to play my game and I'm helping you and you're like you're feeding off me. That mentality is not a great business mentality, quite frankly. That's good if you're a rich guy and you're controlling the whole scene. If you're a guy who's trying to help bring money through the door, you've got to be much more charming, much more persuasive, and have more of a cooperative team building approach to how you're going to do it. Then you've got to throw this in. If you're wondering, yeah, but I've seen some things suggesting positive things about these areas. You haven't heard much though, have you? And you haven't heard many dollar amounts now, have you? And you haven't heard, in the context of what people have invested, what you're making and what the revenue looks like, and then how much people are losing, what the revenue is minus all the expenses and what profit there is. Because in some cases, no profit. In fact, in most cases, no profit. That's one of the things you don't hear about. Well, that in itself is something people don't stop and think about. One thing as a journalist that I have always done, I've always prided myself on, because it's been one of my main strengths, is that when I look at all the information, I don't just look at what is and say what's going on here and how does that interact and what's going on. I look at what is and then I say, what's missing here? What isn't someone mentioning? What would they mention if X condition was met? Something was succeeding or something was failing, or they were very happy with something, or there was actually an amazing deal in place. What would they do? Well, I can tell you, if you go and look at the history of esports, the way people brag about the viewing figures for an event, the way people brag about a new sponsorship deal they've made with someone, the way people will put out the numbers for a broadcast rights deal. This is something you need to stop and think about, because the teams, the owners of the organizations that are in these leagues, they would be all over interviews. They would be all over social media if they were really loving the direction and how strong the sales were relative to their investment and where the trajectory of the leagues were relative to the viewing figures. They'd be shouting it from the rooftops how amazing this was, and it would be spreading out into the coverage that comes from the mainstream, and you'd have all these articles in Business Weekly, Financial Times, that'd be saying the numbers, and that's a way to then signal to other people in the financial business world, get on board, this is a great thing, and it would blow it up even further. That's not happening. You have very vague allusions to it, or you have people just presenting the concept of esports, or taking the whole esports industry, bundling it into one, all the people playing it, all the people watching it, all the history of it, all the like spectacle, oh, it's at the Staples Center, implying it's like basketball in the NBA, and then you have people selling sort of like a very vague, almost like bundled up thing, where you're just buying a very specific sliver of that, a cross section, which doesn't come with all of that. So that makes it seem like there aren't the specifics and the fundamentals there to say that it's succeeding on a relative level to where it should be in terms of true expectations and actual absolute success, where you literally are making profit. Then consider this. I actually think that you have to add in that when you have heard owners speak, first of all, they're using very vague terminology, like the revenue is exceeding expectations for the first year. They haven't even said exceeding, it's just for the first year, where they thought it was going to be at. And when they bought in, you've heard this before, they were sold numbers, and the big organizations were sold numbers, the sports organizations, of very low viewing figures. Less than 100,000 for the Overwatch League. Just getting any deal for the LCS initially seemed good because they didn't used to have pretty much anything and there was no rev share. So the expectations were very, very low. So that when someone says they're exceeding that or even far exceeding that, that's not that crazy actually. That doesn't prove any concept in terms of how the overall league aspect's working. Then you've got to consider that the league and the developers themselves aren't shouting about this stuff, aren't printing numbers, aren't bragging to the business world, even in reports about them, aren't letting this information get out there. And yet, in theory, that would help them get more sponsorship, that would help them get more attention, if indeed it was the case, right? So when I said before, the team owners are the people I think would be most qualified. That's one of the reasons why, and I'll probably do a video on this in the upcoming weeks, I think actually that in Counter-Strike, when they tried the PEA, the Professional Esports Association, where it was like a franchised league with a bunch of NA orgs, but it was the orgs that owned and ran the league and had a whole approach to it, I actually think that would have been amazing. Like, I think that had a very strong chance of succeeding in the future relative to every other esports aspect. I don't know if esports itself can succeed in that way and make big money, but it had one of the best chances to, and it had all the kind of credentials and the pedigree in terms of who was involved with it and what they'd done in their own little realms and their own little puddles, coming together to join forces to really do something special, both in the endemic esports world and the wider esports world. So I think it's a shame, unfortunately, due to some political and then player-based issues, that it didn't come to pass, because I think that could have actually been something which, it wouldn't have had the same investment level as the Overwatch League right now, but it could have been getting close to that, and it could have been a small, really successful thing building itself up, as opposed to chucking all the money in now like the Overwatch League and then hoping you blow it all up, otherwise everyone loses a decent amount of money, nice little chunk of change. Then you've got to consider some other aspects. So in the Overwatch League, they have this aspect where when you're selling merchandise and these sorts of things, you're sharing that rev too. So if one org goes out there, pick one hypothetically, let's say Philadelphia Fusion, right? This is how we do it in Philly. They seem like they've done a pretty good job branding themselves, right? If they go out there and absolutely kill it and are selling loads of t-shirts and jerseys and fans are super into them, they're sharing some of that revenue with the teams that are doing close to fuck all, that don't really have fans, haven't done a good job leveraging their brand, haven't built a big fan base, don't even have like very good merchandise or aren't selling very much. They're sharing some of that with them. Now, in the long term, if you had a really successful league and everything was going great, that might make sense. That might be a good approach, and that might be an aspect where you can then get other smaller people into the league because they're going to get some share of it and it work for everyone. At the moment, quite frankly, that feels quite underwhelming if you're some of these successful orgs that are doing a good job here. You feel like it's like the negative aspects of socialism. Like, you're doing a great job, then you're paying all the tax money into the system, and then some guy is just sort of lying around going, "Oh, can I have my share now?" And then just fucking around and he's getting his share and doesn't appreciate it in the same way. So that's something of a concern for me in a world where already I don't think the rev models are where they should be. Then you've got to consider times where people like Riot, people like the Overwatch League, have actually denied teams the opportunity to make money, to directly start to improve their sponsorship opportunities, exposure levels, and the revenue that they individually as teams were making. So obviously, this was the classic Riot approach for many, many years up until recently, where you couldn't have certain sponsors on your jersey. You couldn't have a certain sponsor in your name. You couldn't even have certain sponsors on your org that technically wasn't in any way sponsoring Riot or the LCS and didn't even necessarily have to be featured in your name or on the LCS broadcast, just a little logo. You couldn't do that, even though it might have brought in a lot of money from the gambling industry, whatever other industries you can think of that they might prohibit. Then you've got to add in this recent thing we saw in the Overwatch League, where they took a page from traditional sports, where when you do the geolocation model, you have say over this territory. Now, the problem is it's way too early in esports to be doing that. Right now, you want to do that in a soft manner, where it's like, okay, you've bought the spot for the Seoul dynasty, but you know what? If other people want to do things in Seoul and the surrounding area of Korea, let them do it for now so that we all benefit. In the future, we'll be stricter with that when everyone's in a good position. Because we had this story that came out where the London Spitfire, obviously the champions of the Overwatch League and an all-Korean team, wanted to go back to Korea and in Seoul do a fan meetup so that all their fans could come and they could like engender a great team atmosphere there. Because obviously they're Korean players, successful org, Koreans love winners, and also Koreans like Overwatch, and there would be a fan demand there. People would be interested. But because it was up to the Seoul dynasty, it's their territory, this could be denied. This could be said, no, this can't happen. Seoul owns that territory. This is only for the Seoul dynasty, this area. That's another example of it's like long-term thinking, But in the short term, it's not going to help you to apply it in that way. And you need to, at the moment, grind out. You need to min-max every aspect of these leagues, every aspect of how the teams operate. If we're going to get to the point where we can survive to where it might be possible to all make really big profits and forget revenue and forget like expectations, just be in an absolute sense making really good money and selling these leagues like they probably should be sold. In one case, from what's established, and the other from what's being promised and the expectation levels of what's going to be in the future. This video was kindly supported by Andreas, Snazore, Westerlund, Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Landon Thompson, NateDOhDoubleG, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, James Harding, Daniel Yordanov, VeXii, Robert Baxter, and a special thanks goes out, as always, to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Would you like to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Would you fancy a few teasers for what's coming up in my content? How about taking part in an esports discussion with me? Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.